Hello there guys, it's Joey. Welcome back to I Can't Witch Without, and this week we will be, as promised, looking at Foxglove. So, precursor to the video, this is how we set it up. Each week we have a look at the meanings from the Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs and the Herbal Compendium by Paul Barrell as 2 reference points, and then go forward and sort of discuss my feelings and thoughts on the energies of the particular thing in question, which this week is Foxgloves. This series is not to say that you require any of the tools in order to be a witch, it's just things I regularly use within my practice and taking a look at them. Right, so from Cunningham's book, we shall. Right, so there are many different names of Foxglove, which is interesting. Cowflop, Dead Men's Bells, Digitalis, Dogfinger, Fairy Finger, Fairy Petticoat, Fairy Thimble, Fairy Weed, Floppy Dock, Flop Top, Folks Gloves, Fox Bells, the Great Herb, Lion's Mouth, Lusmar, Lusna Umboutside, Umboutsy maybe, Our Lady Glove, Witch Bells, Witch's Thimble. They are feminine, associated with Venus, water and protection. Growing around the home, it will protect the home from evil influences. In the past, housewives in Wales used the leaves to make a black dye, which they painted cross lines on their cottage stone's floor to keep evil out. And that is the length and breadth of the Cunningham. So, I'll have a look at the compendium. Okay, there's a bit more in the compendium. Also gives it as being a herb of Venus as well as Pluto, a herb of immortality, visionary, also called Fairy Cap, Fairy Glove, Fairy Thimble, Folk Glove, Witch's Glove. A quick look at the other name for Foxgloves indicates a rich association with the Fae, with the little people and the herb divas. They have... To quote the Master Book of Herbalism, Foxglove is a herb of the underworld and has been used with those with intense initiatory training to commune with those who live there. It's a dangerous practice for the untrained, for Foxglove is also a capricious, and the unwise or foolhardy could easily find the communion with the underworld permanent and too vivid. The juice of this herb can be ritually collected, choose your time according to the moon. In ritual it can be used later to mark the centre of your circle where you sit and wait to see the realm of the Fae. Perhaps the best use of this charming herb is to grow in one's garden, where it will attract all manner of delightful plant devas to bring true magic to your garden. So, it's worth noting right up front that Foxglove is one of the baneful herbs. It's one of the less dangerous ones because if you ingest it, it's actually more likely to make you sick before you get the poisoning, but it's still not a good idea to eat it. But as with a lot of the baneful herbs, the 2 sources are reluctant to really go into any depth with the lore, with the history, with the magical purpose and property, because I think, I don't know if they're like hedging their bets because they are poisonous herbs. So I had a little bit more of a peruse around the mythos of the Foxglove. It's very interesting to me that not only is the Foxglove associated with the goddess Brigitte, but it is associated particularly with the Morrigan and Dagda. And we will revisit that when we're talking about my thoughts and feelings on it. Foxgloves heal plants as well as people. An old name for the foxglove is the doctor, because garden plants near it grow stronger and resistant to disease. I feel very Whovian, very Doctor Who-ish, sort of calling it doctor. The fox part in foxglove is said to be derived from folks, referring to the Fey folk, who may have been plant spirits, or the small Picts that the Celts and Anglo-Saxons overcame. The Picts were thought to have supernatural healing powers and magical powers, and they were pagan through and through, which accorded ill with the Romans and Christian regimes. The Picts may have been some of the original carriers of the knowledge of foxglove healing powers, or that knowledge may go further back. Some of foxglove's other names hint of ancient powers. Foxglove is associated with the planet Venus, and the names for foxgloves that refer to the Virgin Mary are also likely a whitewash of older connections of foxgloves associated with Venus and other goddesses. Mary often did service in place of earlier goddesses with more pagan fertility leanings. In some forms of Italian magic, foxgloves opens the user to strong sexual love appropriate to Venus. But whilst romantic love is probably the best known association, she also rules art, beauty and fae who live in the earthly realm of enchantment. One version of Venus is the tarot card the Empress, who sits enthroned and often pregnant in a garden of fruits and flowers, the ruler of earthly delights. That seems particularly appropriate for a plant that can improve the fertility of the plants next to it, in correlating basically foxglove with the Empress tarot card. There are more literal associations with fertility goddesses too. Digitalis, which is the Latin name for foxglove, is extremely abundant in seeds, 80,000 per ounce, and it propagates itself steadily. Foxglove is also known to be a sacred herb to the Druids, particularly with regards to the little people, the Fae. The magic properties of foxglove are given as to attract Fae, protection from evil, increasing self-esteem, self-confidence, helping to heal wounds of the heart, easing mental turmoil and quieting the mind. They are also used in ritual contact of the other world and are known with the ability to hurt and heal. They can heal heart conditions or poison, depending on the dosage and the correct use. I wouldn't recommend using any baneful herb unless you've had correct training and all that sort of thing, which I will say now. I'm also going to say, don't be ingesting poisonous herbs. Just use your common sense and you'll be fine. Okay, so for me, I always find the information surrounding a lot of baneful herbs quite lacking and quite like they're almost trying to whitewash it, because they don't really want to delve into the baneful side of herbs and flowers and things. So this particular flower is associated with Fae and a deep sexuality, the other world, and the Morrigan and Dagda. Now for me that paints a very vivid image, at least in terms of my practice, because basically it's connecting the realm of life and death. It's the incredible potency of sexual power, particularly in female sexual energy, which sometimes gets lost in the recorded histories. And it's something about the idea that things that can harm and heal. Some people say that is a requirement of witches, that witches have to know how to harm in order to know how to heal. And it's interesting then that the Foxglove does have names which associates it very much so with witches, witches' fingers, things like that. It also hints at relationship between plant devas, plant spirits, and witchcraft, without really spelling it out for us. I like Foxglove very much in that it does seem to be one of these flowers of mystery, of learning, of the deeper mystery, the darker mystery, the going into the other world and learning for yourself. It speaks to me of journeys that you find in myth and legend, whereby the protagonist has to go down into the world of the Fae and has to gain entrance to the world of the Fae, and it's not this fluffy image of Fae that is modernly portrayed, but the more ancient form of Fae that were tricksy and cunning and very sexual and abducted humans for their sexual appetites and made love to humans and all sorts. And it was one of these perilous underworld journeys that Foxglove could so easily represent. And the whims of the Fae were very changeable. They could heal you and love you and be kind, or they could harm you and hurt you and not be so kind. And I think Foxglove definitely has that energy, that duality weaving within it. It's something a little bit more primal, a little bit more edgy, if you like. A big raven flying past the window. Sorry. That's my raven that he's been following me around. He has, on one side, one of his wings looks a bit raggedy, so I can tell it's him. Anyway, on that note, seeing as Foxglove does associate with Morrigan and Dagda, it does tie into that energy of life and death in mating ritual. Some people see the mating of Dagda and Morrigan at Samhain of all times, when the veil is thinnest and we honour the dead, as the coming together in sexual union of life and death, and the interlocking ritual union of polar opposites, duality coming together in the sexual act to form a wholeness. I always think that sexuality and our primal urges are quite close to our fascination with matters of the macabre, matters of death. And it's interesting to me how both subjects are two of the driving pillars of human fascination throughout the ages. There are also two aspects of the Morrigan, but when you think about it, no two matters conjure up so much imagination to the human psyche as matters of sexuality and then matters of death. And they cross over to the point where you can find them within literature, particularly with things like the vampires. You can see a little vampire bat in the background on the altar cloth, is a particularly strong recurrent theme within literature, which gets rewritten over time and replayed over time as the human fascination with vampires comes down to the sort of darker sexuality. Even the French call the orgasm the little death, le petit mort, which I think the French often do sum things up with beautifully with language, and that ties into something which perhaps is a little bit more primal, a little bit more animalistic in our natures, which I think quite frequently we get too far away from and try and hide away from and try to pretend that the world is all civilized now and gloss over things, and it becomes kind of repressive towards sexuality. And therefore, for me, Foxglove ties into all these themes. And there is hints and mentions of the fact that in some forms of Italian witchcraft, The Foxglove opens the user up to a sexual love, to being able to embrace their sexuality and attract their sexual mate. And within this scope, I think it makes a lot of sense. That makes more sense to me than any of the other lore that I read, other than the Fae, but that makes, that ties into this deeply sensual, sexual side of Foxglove magic. And if you think about the two themes, which I think basically are associated with Foxglove, sexuality and death, these can be used to harm or to heal, and I will explain. So sexuality is obvious in terms of it can be used to harm or to heal. Sexuality can be used by a person in inappropriate ways to, I don't know, when people engage in sexual behaviour which is about taking out their pain on an aspect of themselves. There's a long history of I don't know how best to put it. Basically, if you look at it one way, one of the oldest trades in the world is prostitution, the selling of sexual favour. It gets tied into this sort of unfortunate power play when it is misused. However, sexuality can be a deeply healing process. To connect sexually with your significant other, the person that you love most within the world, can be an incredibly beautiful experience. In terms of death, it can be a little bit more difficult to learn how I mean harm and heal. Obviously, death in terms of harming is fairly obvious. We can cause premature death, and the death of others causes those around them deep mourning and deep pain. However, death can come as a release in a lot of ways, and in that circumstance, if it is a more positive end than the continuance of suffering, then it could be seen as healing. But in other ways as well, it's forms of death within our lifetime which aren't as permanent as the final death, which is, life cycles that we all go through, and miniature deaths, if you like, throughout lives that put end to situations which are negative, and these can be deeply healing. And I think Foxglove has this dual nature, this duality that is so present in the lore of the Fae and through the messages I just sort of ascribed. In terms of love magic, in terms of Venus magic, which is close but not the same to, your sexual magic, that can also be used to harm or to heal depending on the situation and how it is used. I think Foxglove gives us a beautiful insight into some of the perhaps a little bit darker, a little bit more difficult to cope with energies and messages of our lives. I, for one, am definitely going to be engaging in Morrigan worship with the Foxglove. I think it speaks to her duality, and I love that it corresponds to her relationship with Dagda. I think that for me is a really strong, wonderful essence. It also has an incredible otherworldly vibe about it when you look at them, because they're so luring and so beautiful and so sexy, and yet they can be dangerous, and that's a good lesson to be holding on to in the lesson of all baneful herbs, and particularly when working with regards to what the Fae really means, and the less civilized energies of the Morrigan. So that's it for today for I Can't Witch Without. Many blessings.